It begins not with a flood, but with betrayal. The moment of the annual inundation, the life-giving, transformative flood of the Nile fails to rise to its appointed, measured height. A silence settles over the valley. It is a silence heavier than any drought, a profound anxiety that grips the heart of the community. The river, usually a glorious brown torrent pushing out across the floodplain, sits low in its bed, a ribbon of water too contained, too modest. The fertile black silt, the gifts of the god that replenished the land, is deposited in the narrow, meager bend, leaving vast stretches of crucial farmland untouched and thirsty. The soil is not the expected rich, fertile mud. It is hard, cracked, and dusted with the old sterile sand of the desert. This is the year of happiest disappointment, the year of scarcity. Survival now shifts entirely from the rhythm of abundance to a fierce, disciplined strategy of conservation and community. Every action becomes measured, every grain of stored wet, every drop of well water, every movement of the body. The color of the landscape itself is the first signal, not the vibrant green of sprouting barley, but the dull, unforgiving yellow gray of the unwatered desert pressing in. There is no panic, for panic achieves nothing. There is only a deep ancestral resolve. The Egyptian response to the dry year is not one of the frantic improvisation, but a return to the oldest, most rigorous discipline of their civilization. The calculated, ritualized stretching of resources, guided by faith in the iron will of the community. The strategy begins with a solemn, profound gamble, a necessary act of hope performed on land that already feels lost. The first unavoidable action in the dry year was the solemn ritual of planting with fingers crossed, an act that was equal parts technical labor, desperate gamble, and a prayer. The failed inundation meant that only the higher ground, those areas above the meager floodline, remained unirrigated. Yet, the work could not stop. To surrender was to accept starvation. To plant was to invoke the possibility of life. This stage demanded the most acute agricultural judgment. The farmers had to abandon the tradition, deep planting on the flooded silt. Instead, they focused their intense labor on areas previously thought marginal, land near the edges of the smaller canals, buckets of earth close to deeper water wells, or even old secondary fields that had only been used in times of great plenty. The soil was brutally hard, requiring intense work with the hoe and the simple plow. The sound was a rhythmic dry thudding, the sharp impact of wood and bronze against earth that refused to yield. The sweat was bitter and immediate, yet the work could not be rushed. The most crucial difference lay in the precision of the sowing. Seed precious, limited, and the entire community's future could not be broadcast carelessly. It was planted deeply, painstakingly, often by hand, directly into the driest earth, relying on hope that some residual moisture from the previous year or the faint capillarity of the earth might sustain the initial root. This was the moment of profound faith. As the farmer's fingers covered the small dry seed with the equally dry soil, they were making a silent, non-negotiable demand on the gods and on the resilience of the earth. They worked until the heat drove them back, knowing that the yield, even if successful, would be meager. The ritual was complete only when they had done everything humanly possible, leaving the rest of the will of the unseen forces, a testament to their enduring belief that effort precedes reward, even in scarcity. One of the gamble of planting was finished. the community turned inward and outward, engaging in the necessary social strategy of bartering with neighbors. A failed Nile flood was rarely uniform. Some upstream villages or communities with deeper, better maintained canals might have received enough water to sustain the partial crop, while others downstream were completely devastated. Survival was determined by the strength of the social network. The central pillar of this dry year strategy was not hoarding, but sharing and calculating exchange. The primary unit of exchange was the surplus, the grain saved in the community silos from the previous better year. This grain, often held under the authority of the local temple or the village scribe, was now released slowly, not as a charity but as credit. A family with small herd of healthy goats might trade milk or the future labor of a son for a measured quantity of barley seed or stored wheat. A potter, whose clay supply was unaffected by the drought, might trade high-quality water-conserving clay jars for dried fish or preserved vegetables. The market did not vanish, it became sharper, quieter, and infinitely more ethical. This barter was conducted with a high degree of decorum and formalized politeness. Even in desperation, trust or ma'at was the most valuable commodity. To cheat or hoard during a dry year was to violate the deepest tenets of communal order, risking ostracization and death. The air of the marketplace was hushed, lacking the usual boisterous energy. The touch of the dry hands exchanging goods became a profound connection, a reminder that they were all equally exposed to the elements. Even the animals had their ways. The health of a working ox or a sturdy donkey became a form of living currency, their value carefully weighed against the cost of their maintenance. Bartering with neighbors was the process by which the community redistributed the pain of scarcity, ensuring that the burden, though heavy, was borne by all, preventing individual collapse. The most relentless day-to-day discipline of the dry year was the task of stretching supplies without complaint. This was the quiet, constant siege warfare fought within the walls of every home. It required a profound psychological shift, moving from eating to live well to living simply to conserve. The core of this strategy was the management of stored grain and water. The family structure became an engine of conservation. Meals were reduced in size and frequency. The basic staple, the bread, was made smaller, denser, and coarser, often mixed with less desirable grains or fillers to bulk off the loaf. The texture of the food changed entirely. Less fat, less sweetness, more roughness and fiber. The daily ritual of grinding grain became more laborious, as the workers knew the few handfuls they were processing would need to sustain the family for a disproportionately long time. The sound of the grinding stone was slow, heavy, and purposeful. Water usage, already highly conserved in normal times, became hyper-efficient. Bathing and cleaning rituals were dramatically reduced, relying almost entirely on the dry ash and sand methods of friction, saving every possible drop of stored water for drinking and cooking. The family was constantly aware of the contents of the silo and water jar. They were the physical clock, counting down their survival time. This stretching was not performed with grumbling or resentment. It was done with a stoic, silent resolve, a sense of shared hardship. Even the children learned their rhythms. They understood without being told that a drop of bread was a disaster, and a carelessly spilled cup of water was a sin against the community. Stretching supplies without complaint was the silent testament to the Egyptians' virtue of endurance. a psychological shield against the crushing reality of want. The mind became as rigid and unyielding as the parched earth, refusing to break until the Nile, in its own slow time, decided to smile again. When food became scarce, the act of consumption shifted entirely from a simple necessity to a ritual of eating with reverence. The meager meal prepared each day was not simply consumed, it was treated as a sacred gift, a physical manifestation of the community's shared will to survive, and a profound link to the gods who provided the harvest. This reverence transformed the dining table, often a simple mat on the floor, into an altar of gratitude. The food, usually a small portion of heavy bread, a few onions, or perhaps a small portion of lentils, was approached with absolute stillness and respect. No noisy chewing, no careless handling, and certainly no waste was permitted. Every bite was an affirmation of life, a conscious decision to nourish the body for another day of labor. The taste of the food became magnified. The sharp, vital tinge of the onion, the dense, earthy weight of the bread, the clean texture of the lentil broth. They tasted not just the flavors, but the effort that went into growing, storing, and preparing them. Before the first bite, a small offering or blessing was always made, a simple gesture of acknowledgement towards the earth, the silo, or the sky, thanking the protective gods in the wren, the food god, for the continuation of the supply. This ritual ensured that the meal is served a spiritual as well as a physical purpose, connecting the family to the larger cosmic order, Ma'at, even when that order seemed to be failing them. The act of sharing the small loaf became a deeply symbolic. Breaking the bread was breaking the shared hardship, confirming their mutual dependence. Even the children learned their rhythms by being taught to chew slowly, to feel the texture of the rough grain, and to appreciate the fundamental fact that they were eating at all. This reverence was a survival technique itself, instilling the mental fortitude that prevented the despair of hunger from overwhelming the will to survive. It turned the moment of physical want into a sustained affirmation of spiritual wealth and hope. Amidst the constant physical struggle of conservation and labor, the greatest effort of the dry year was the spiritual one, the relentless ritual of praying to the flood god, Happy. Happy was the personification of the Nile's annual inundation, a god whose power was both essential and terrifyingly unpredictable. When the water failed to rise, the prayers did not cease, they intensified, moving from routine observance to a collective desperate plea. The prayers were not angry demands, they were acts of humility, deference, and petition. The prayers were performed not just in the temples, but in every domain of life. Small offerings were made near the banks of low-lying river. Small pieces of bread, flowers, or libations of precious conserved water, sacrificed in the hope that Happy would see their need and be moved by their faith. The air of the community was filled with a low continuous chanting or humming, a communal, non-verbal expression of need that carried on throughout the day, often led by the local priests and scribes who understood the sacred formula. The focus was on restoration, on correcting the imbalance of his fate, and returning the world to Ma'at. The image of Happy, often depicted as a plump fertile figure with pendulous breast, carrying offerings, was constantly invoked. They prayed for the weight and color of the water to return, for the immense black silt to replenish the field, and for the river to rise to the perfect nourishing height. Even the children learned their rhythms, reciting the simple prayers that invoke the cold deep waters of the mysterious source of the Nile. This collective prayer was a powerful form of social cohesion. It gave the community a shared task that transcended physical labor, binding them together in a unified spiritual struggle. The hope was that by demonstrating their piety and their desperate need, they would remind the God of covenant. The people serve the gods, and the gods, in return, provide the life-giving water. This ritual sustained them not with food, but with the certainty of hope, the belief that the water had failed not permanently but momentarily, and that the divine order would eventually be restored. The final, and perhaps most difficult spiritual discipline of the dry year was the ritual of giving thanks anyway. This was a conscious, profound act of stoicism and emotional mastery, a refusal to allow the lack of water to extinguish the spirit of gratitude. To give thanks in times of obvious plenty is easy. To give thanks when the silo is half empty and the fields are cracked is an act of defiance against despair. The philosophy behind this was simple. Even in the worst year, there were still gifts. The sun still rose, providing light and heat. The river, though low, had not vanished entirely, still providing enough water for life. The mud brick walls of the home still stood, providing shelter. The family still gathered, providing love and labor. The silo, though dangerously low, was not yet empty, a testament to the wisdom of the previous year's ancestors. The daily ritual of thanks was meditation on what remained, not what was lost. This thanks was often built into the existing framework of the evening meal. Even if the meal was thin, a blessing was given that was longer and more elaborate than in normal times, detailing specific items of gratitude. We thank the gods for the few grains of remaining in the great silo. We thank the earth for the tenacity of the onion, which still provides flavor. We thank the water for its precious coolness, though it is small. This practice recalibrated the standard of wealth. A full cup of water was not merely a necessity, it was a luxury. A single fresh vegetable was a feast. Even the children learned their rhythms, being taught to point out one thing they were genuinely grateful for each night. This enforced gratitude was the final critical step in the survival strategy. It ensured that the psychological strain of the dry year did not break the community spirit, allowing them to remain aligned with the Ma'at, ready and worthy of the abundance that they trusted would eventually return. From the gamble of the dry earth to the final act of gratitude, that was the essential rhythm of endurance against the dry year. It began with planting with fingers crossed, committing to labor despite the odds. It was secured by bartering with neighbors, distributing the burden of scarcity through trust. It was sustained by stretching supplies without complaint, mastering the art of conservation. It was honored by eating with reverence, treating the meager meal as a sacred gift. It was guided by praying to the flood god, binding the community through shared plea. And it was anchored by giving thanks anyway, refusing to let despair extinguish the spirit. The lamps grow dim. The final embers in the cooking fire are covered with ash, conserving the heat. The silo stands low, but its door is still tight. The river runs low, a dark ribbon beneath the stars. The village sleeps deeply and without dream, assured that they have managed the day's scarcity wisely. The rhythm is complete, and now you are at rest.